The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Seymour Hersh, the investigative journalist, political writer, and author. You first gained widespread recognition in 1969 for exposing the My Lai massacre and its cover-up during the Vietnam War. From there, you went on to cover the Watergate scandal for the New York Times and also reported on the secret U.S. bombing of Cambodia. In 2004, you detailed the U.S. military's torture and abuse of prisoners at Abu Ghraib in Iraq, while in 2015, you asserted that the Obama administration had lied about the death of Osama bin Laden. For your work, you've received the Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting, a record 5 George Polk Awards, and 2 National Magazine Awards. Just recently, you published an article claiming that the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines was carried out by the U.S. Navy, the CIA, and the Norwegian Navy under the direct order of President Biden. Seymour, welcome to London Real.
I'm glad to be here.
Great to have you. It seems like you have become super internet famous in the past week, as independent media like ourselves is really curious about this story, while mainstream media like the New York Times, Washington Post, and everybody else has completely ignored it. I'm curious if we could just dive into it, Seymour. What happened with Nord Stream? Why does it matter?
The bombing of Nord Stream really matters because it happened last fall, late September. And at that point, Joe Biden, my president, was pushing very hard. As you know, he just had this, one-on-one with Putin in speeches, very aggressive, very hostile, and tensions are ratcheting up. And what he did, the intelligence community is interesting because many people in the intelligence community, I know it's hard to say this, they take the oath of office, which they take is to the Constitution. Not to the president, not to their boss, and those are the people over the years that I'm 300 years old, man. And so I'm after all these years, I know a lot of people that ended up as 4 stars in all sorts of places, and ended up being involved in some of the most complicated stuff in the government, and so pretty much have a sense of what to do and not to do. So I heard about this story. A month after it happened. Nobody came to me with it. I asked about it with somebody I knew who was inside. And so what it was is Biden wants to go to war, I think, in some unconscious way with Putin. He wants to mix it up with the Russians. I don't know why, but one thing I can tell you about presidents, they have noted that the presidents like Lincoln and Roosevelt who win wars become famous presidents, great presidents. So they always have that itch. And particularly a president at war always gets better ratings than a president not at war. Poor Bill Clinton, when he got in office, had issued a demand about gays in the military, and he was being ridiculed. Don't ask, don't tell. And he's just being embarrassed because he has supported that position. Very unprogressive America at that time on gay issues. And so in May or June of the first year, 6 months in office, he ordered the bombing of Baghdad. First major bombing of a major city in the Middle East, by us ever. And it was the best day he's ever had. The next day he went to church, reported, it was a Saturday, did the bombing. Sunday he had reporters all over. It was a great day for him. So, that's just the way it is. That's just the way we respond. And so I'm just giving you sort of the heuristic approach. I don't know what really was in his mind. I have a guess, but late in Christmas of 2021, before that, in December, it definitely looked like Putin was going to go to war. he'd had it with the Ukrainians. He thinks they're sort of sub-level anyway. Some people might remember from the history books in the early 1930s, Russia let 22 million people starve in the Ukraine. Just took all the grain from them and they just died. They've always treated it as a subculture. And we've never really been big fans of Ukraine, NATO in particular, because of the corruption there. And also the fact that a significant body of the leadership, even as late as now, or before this war, had Nazi insignias. There was a lot of that crazy stuff going on there. Really, but on the other hand, Kiev was a fun city to visit with a lot of good restaurants, etc. And so the agency, a group in the covert world, was assigned a mission in December. We want to do something to convince Putin to back down. And we're yipping and yelling by the president. Wasn't doing it. He was building up the forces. And so the term of art I use is important because anybody on the inside knows I know something. The words used were the group assembled, NSA, CIA, not the FBI, I don't think, Treasury Department, State Department, all the people who could contribute either funding or what you will. They started meeting in a secret room in a building across the executive office building, which is on the White House grounds, but it's separate. It's where they hide most of the executive offices are there. They started meeting, and the question being asked of the White House through intermediaries, this is the president, do you want something reversible like sanctions or something irreversible? And the word came back, irreversible. That means kinetic. So the option was, of course, take out the pipelines. Why not? Threaten to, because since the Kennedy days, there's been a lot of worry as the Cold War went on, and we had this crazy notion of containment. We could contain communism. In the Kennedy days, even the Kennedy days on, Russia's ability to feed gas at a cheap price to Europe was bothersome because it gave Russia what you could call, what this White House did call weaponizing gas. That's what they were worried about. Russia was using weaponizing gas. And the fear was we have to hold Germany and NATO, who get a lot. They have no natural resources there in Western Europe. And they were being supplied for a dozen since 2011, when the first pipeline, Nord Stream, there's two pipelines. The first one was built, began pumping an enormous amount of gas at an incredibly cheap price, building up the German engine. The largest chemical company in the world, BASF, is there. And we have all those automobiles, the fancy cars that we all love in America. The world loves it, Mercedes, et cetera. And so what to do about that? That was always a problem. So the war starts, and we're pushing, NATO's involved. We're pushing Western Europe, and the Germans. We want more tanks, planes, guns, et cetera. And at some point, and so the idea was give them this option. But once the war started, the people in the field, and they went to Norway because the Norwegian sailors, I actually published a piece today about Norway's role in Vietnam. Norway had a huge role in building up the Vietnam attacks we made against the North before the war was even declared.
And Norway and the U.S. always have had a close relationship. They were the first one to join NATO in '49, and
got it.
It's very close, and they have
very close, very hostile to Russia
Navy
too,
and underwater crews as well.
Well, and also don't forget they have 1,400 miles of ocean, all the way. Norway goes 1,400 miles from European Oslo, all the way up to the Arctic Circle, where they run into Russia.
Right. And
so we have built in the last decade. We have put up the most advanced synthetic aperture radar. They cost hundreds of millions, if not more, radar to monitor the Russian nuclear weapons fields across the mountains in Russia, northern Russia, Kola Peninsula. Really cold up there. Anyway, and so we built bases. We've added to their Air Force. We work closely with their Navy, and of course, we worked very closely with them in the early stages of the Vietnam War. They were running up. We were running Navy SEAL teams and operations long before the war began. I mean, we were working against the North and doing a lot of aggressive stuff that wasn't long before anybody in America knew much about the war that Kennedy has sort of pushed to. Anyway, that's all ancient history. It's a place that fits because they keep their mouth shut. And I was unfair to them. In the story I wrote, I said they made profit they did make a good profit because the price of gas has gone up, but the amount of gas they ship to Western Europe has only risen about 3-4% since this the pipeline was shut down. The price of gas, though, has made their profit doubled. So the price right now, even though it's been a warm winter, people are paying. It's 3 to 4 times as much in Italy, 5 times as much in France for electricity, and generates power plants are generated by oil, and so the price is going up, and so anyway, so these guys are watching this. The guys that did it, I mean, and they do, as I say, they take the oath of office to the Constitution, not to the president and not to their commanding officer. These are tough guys. They like to do stuff that makes sense to them. So they did plant the bombs. They were ready to go. They could go at any time, but Biden said no. They initially got it done in June. He said no then. And then by July, August, with the war on, they thought it's okay. Late September, he orders the hit. They do it.
Right. So they go in June because we're running a NATO exercise. So they came up with a plan. They had the cover. They got the divers in there. But then Biden said, I want to make it contingent, right? So he could do it by remote control later, which was a little bit challenging for them, but they found a way to do that.
It's a lot more challenging than I actually wrote about because for a lot of reasons. One is, of course, when you communicate to bombs that are set to be triggered by a signal sent by a sonar, it's low frequency because the water burns up high frequency. It's low and slow. And it's, the way you do it, to make it really simple, when you're a kid, you probably played these games, knock, 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 knock. It's like 3 knocks and 2 little ones. So it's a pulse that triggers, the sonar reads it, the sonar goes, triggers the pulse, which triggers the bombs. And the stuff, we're talking about stuff that can blow up a major goddamn high-rise, big office building in New York. And, it's real C4 maxed out, it's really a powerful bomb. The pipeline's covered by steel, and it's also covered by concrete, because otherwise you don't want the salinity in the water, even though Baltic's much less salty than the Atlantic. Is still salty. You don't want it to eventually corrode. So it's a big project to blow it up. The problem, anyway.
And you have to hide the bombs so they're not visible by any Russians coming to.
Oh yeah, you have to. First, they're built underground, but anyway, some of them go underground. But basically, Russians have underwater submarines, unmanned submarines spying, and they can detect something strange. And I don't know. I do know the details. Would have taken about 3 books to get it done, and so they actually reached putting it there once to go off in 48 hours. You put a timer on it. If a miner's down there, if a diver's down there and he sets the bomb, he's not going to set it for 10 minutes because it takes him a little while to get out of there, and it's going to blow sky high. So they have a 24-hour, 48-hour timer they put automatically. You don't have to trigger it. It's going to go in 2 days. But the White House nixed that, not knowing the complications. And then you have a big period of how long they wanted to stay underwater. 1 day, 3 days, 3 months. And so there was a lot of problems about it. I didn't write about it. They had to go to all the major laboratories that the Navy has. And by the way, when you say Navy, you're right. But I will tell you, everybody on that project from the Navy was TDY, that temporary duty. The Pentagon didn't know. Their bosses in the Pentagon did not. I'm turning off my phone. Hold on.
So the Pentagon didn't know.
So
the CIA.
So they had to go. Actually, they went to a country called England, which seems to do a lot about underwater stuff, to get help on how to fix it. They did fix it. They made it so it could go off. And then the president decides to do it in late September. By this time, if you remember last summer, it looked like Ukraine had won a great victory. They were rolling through. The Russians fell back. Well, it turned out, as the fall went on, at the best you could hope for by late fall would be a stalemate, that maybe you can get through the winter and do some serious negotiation, and maybe you can get Russia to back off a little bit on Crimea. Not likely, but on some of the provinces that are the provinces Donbass that are in play. So when they popped it. Here's the thinking that I get. Biden decided to blow Nord Stream 2, which was controlled by Germany. The first one, Putin had already shut down the first one in anger, off the rhetoric. The second one was pump still there, ready to pump. It'd been built, it'd been constructed. He shut it down. The Germans shut it down, and the fear was Germany was getting anxious about the war. There were so many economic demands. There were also there was also pressure from Western Europe, and there were questions being raised about what are we doing? Are we going to, there was a lot of fear that they were going to end up in a protracted war with Russia that they would not win. And so Biden's fear was that Schultz would say, "The hell with this! I got winter coming. I'm taking I want the gas. I don't want my people, my companies to go dry this winter." He would do the political thing and open up the pipeline. So he took that option away from him. And let me tell you what that means. I don't do politics. Politicians call me. There's a lot of stuff going on in Germany now in the Bundestag and their parliament about this. A lot of concern about this decision. What he did is he told Europe, all right, since World War II, you guys are dependent on it. We had your back, really good. But in this case, we value more trying to stand up to Russians more than you. So be cold and have your industry slow down. And right now you have the biggest, as I mentioned, BASF talking to China about maybe, doing some business there, moving some things there, because they don't have the gas costs too much. The biggest corporations in the world, that is the biggest chemical company, is looking forward to a lousy next winter. Over between September and October in the fall, it was a very mild winter. They built up stocks so that when winter came, they could get through this winter. They will get through it, even though prices have gone up. And I think the Bundestag, the temperature's kept at 60 degrees. A lot of people there are wearing, their ski underwear. I assume everybody in Germany skis. Why not? I would if I were there. Anyway, and
well, the U.S. made a conscious choice to also communicate to Europe that, guess what? Our political aims are more important than you, and our alliance, which is NATO, which we're supposed to all stick together. In this case, it's not. And we want to let you know we're willing to do these things. So they let Putin know and Germany know.
You just said it in 2 sentences. That's what the thinking of the people involved. And that's probably why I was learning as much as I did, because there was a sense that the president had sort of misused a very significant element. And there, look, I've been talking to people that came out. I did a story about a My Lai massacre. It was 18 months afterwards. Nobody wanted to publish it. Nobody believed the story. There were polls done when I published the first story in some not left-wing, just a magazine, a newspaper that had American correspondents who knew Vietnamese, called Dispatch, but nobody was paying much attention to it. I couldn't get a major, even though I had been around. Anyway, I can't tell how hard it was to not only have interviewed the guy, Kelly, that they charged and have a copy of the charge sheet and still not get a major paper to prove it. It's not like, in this case, I don't have a document. And so I get so many people that ask me, well, how can you prove it? And I said, I had the same thing after My Lai. I didn't have a video of it. I don't have a video of these guys under the water digging around, but that's a crazy standard, because I eventually went to work for the New York Times. I got the first real writing job I got after doing My Lai was at the New Yorker, the best magazine in the goddamn world at the time. I went and saw the editor, William Shawn. Everybody said, he won't even talk to you. Within 5 minutes, he hired me. And I did stuff for him for a couple of years. And then the editor of the New York Times, Abe Rosenthal, was very conservative, but damn it, he liked stories. And he hired me and he let me go. He said, just go. And I wrote stuff. I wrote about the CIA spying on American students. I wrote about the CIA going after Allende. I wrote some NSA stuff that I don't have to brag about, because in principle, I like the idea of having intelligence collection. I didn't like them turning on us. That's what they did at one point. The CIA began to spy on American citizens. And they're too good to do that. They got stopped, and that led to the famous hearings, the Church Committee, that first time we tried, the Senate tried to do something. And by the way, it's no shock to me that the Democratic Senate, led by Chuck Schumer, I haven't heard a word from anybody. There hasn't been a word said in Congress about this.
Yeah, so let's talk about the reaction to this piece, because first of all, the mainstream media haven't picked it up at all. The White House press secretary denied it, I think, when they were asked by reporters afterwards, or they went out of their way of denying it when they weren't even asked. There's been some Republicans in Congress that are now asking around saying, wait a second, if this was covert, shouldn't we have been notified? What has been the reaction? What surprised you about that? What hasn't surprised you?
Well, I know that if you want to get away from the story, and when I did stuff, I mentioned a story I did on the CIA spying completely contrary to their every law set in the books. They were never supposed to touch anything like that in America.
Yeah.
I told the New York Times, I've been working on it for 2 years. I told my editor 2 days before, I wrote 7,000 words in the paper with 7 unnamed sources, okay? And nobody called up and said, who are the sources? They'd asked me earlier and they learned who they were. So on this story, they ran it all over the front page. And that's the power of the Times, which isn't being used now. But now you use the fact that I'm not naming a source. And I can't even say anything that I've learned that puts anybody in a room. Because one thing we're good at is finding out people who might be talking. You know what I mean? At this point, anybody could know from the source. But I've got a long track record. That they walk away from this one has to do, I think, with the polarization of the press that maybe Trump started. Trump came in and, you either liked him or you didn't like him. We soon had Fox News and the New York Post and other papers who were more, I guess, to the right, more conservative. And then you had the liberal press in total opposition. So it was and it stayed because it's a Democrat in power. The Democratic Senate's not going to touch it. The Republicans own the House. The one guy the one guy that seems to be way out there, who's quite bright, is Jim Jordan, who's chairman of a committee. Jordan's really, I've watched Jim run. He was a head of a subcommittee in the House at one point, and he ran hearings on very complex money issues. A lot of money issues, and he understands things. He does his homework, but he's caught up in trying to find out what's going on with Hunter Thompson, the son. That sort of peripheral issue. Why they're not looking at this more seriously? You mentioned that there's some talking, but there's been no serious action taken to find out. And let me tell you something. About the power of the White House. This happens on the 26th of September. He stiffs Europe, basically. And 4 days later, there's a news conference, and the press corps, Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor to the president, one of the gaggle that was always for expanding NATO during his career. That's been one of his things. So Sullivan gives a briefing, and finally somebody asks him about the pipeline that blew up. And he does the thing, well, we don't know anything, but he says very carefully, very interestingly, but Denway and Normark are going to be looking at it. And we'll, of course, we have no idea. It looks like the Russians did it. The Russians are behaving in the ways they do, dropping that stuff, the usual stuff. And no reporter seems to know what the president had said, the threat he'd made earlier. That isn't mentioned, because that's pretty important in my version of the story. Anyway, and he says there's going to be an investigation. The Swedes and the Danes are doing an investigation. So, okay, we got an answer. A month later, the Swedes and Danes, after their investigation, guess what they report? They concluded something happened underground. There was an explosion that probably was sabotage. That was their conclusion a month later. It's comical, really comical. And meanwhile, and so here's the president of the United States. He has the power to do something to send out something called a tasking order. The president can task the community, and he's got a lot of options. We have something called the Office of National Intelligence, which is the PUBA. They're in charge of all of it, the known and the unknown and the down and dirty. And they have a director of intelligence who has the charge to do any investigation. He's not asked to do anything. There's also the CIA, which has a directorate of intelligence, which puts out a lot of superb stuff. All the machinations of the agency. Its intelligence is usually, it can sometimes be tilted, but a lot of times it's quite brilliant and very straightforward, particularly when they work with other allies. And nobody asks them. And then there's a little black intelligence service.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.